Welcome to my Commodore 64 Games memories. This is where I look at old games and some of the technical details behind them. Let's get into it. Today we have Lemmings, published in 1994 by Psygnosis and E Software, developed by DMA Design, programmed by Thomas Mittelmeier, Leon van Rooij, Alain Janssen, and Greg Duddle. The musician was Jeroen Tel. So this game actually came out way towards the end of the Commodore 64 life cycle. Back in 1994, I actually started my full-time career working at Argonaut Games, programming games on the Super Nintendo and Philips CDI and PlayStation, etc., etc. So because this game came out right at the end of the life cycle of the Commodore 64, it is technically very interesting and technically very competent because it's a conversion of the Amiga game. Now, the Amiga game had really nice graphics, of course nice colourful graphics, because it was a 16-bit computer. The Commodore 64, being an 8-bit machine, was going to always struggle with this kind of conversion, but I think the conversion was done really, really well. Now, there's a nice little, when the game starts, you have nice little messages saying Lemmings was made possible thanks to the following people, blah blah blah, and it lists a whole bunch of people. This intro sequence is very nice with fading bitmaps. It's always nice to see polish going into this. Now, this game was actually released on 3 floppy disks, amazingly enough. I think the intro was basically on the first side, and then there were different difficulty levels on different sides of the disc. Now, this intro is actually quite special. There was a lot of effort and polish put into this intro, and I liked it a lot. So we'll have a little look at that technically first, and then we'll have a look at the game, because the game has kind of like a twist or a surprise in how it does its graphics. But first of all, let's just have a little look at this disk loader. It seemed to be relatively quite quick, and we'll just have a look to see what it's doing. I have a feeling it's doing a 2-bit protocol transfer. Putting a range breakpoint on the drive side, we can see it quite quickly reaches this RAM-based routine. So we've got some drive code running. How much decoding is the Commodore 64 doing compared to how much encoding the drive side is doing? Let's have a look. So this looks interesting. The JSR to CF0B 4 times, and then a JSR to CF0A, which just doesn't RTS. This looks like it's getting bit pairs and rotating the value into $FD, which is way down in 0 page on the Commodore 64 side. It's doing a load A with DD00, which is the serial port, and then it's storing an acknowledgement. Looks like it's storing a patterned load X with $93 there at CF0B, and then storing X in DD00, so it's storing an acknowledgement pattern. And yes, it just rotates 2 bits at a time. Oh no, actually it is okay, so it's a simple JSR, but it's actually rotating 1 bit at a time. Apologies. Yes, it's rotating 1 bit at a time, but it's doing it in 2-bit chunks. Well, okay, fine, never mind. So it's not quite a 2-bit protocol, it's doing like a handshaking signal, isn't it? So the drive is doing its tight wait loop. Yeah, so the drive is doing that little wait for the acknowledgement to come along. The acknowledgement is just after the Commodore 64 has read the bit coming over the serial connection from the drive. So a 1-bit protocol there. So let's zoom ahead to the intro portion of the game. We can see here at halfway through 4000 in hex, we have got a whole bunch of sprites and then high resolution borders around it by the looks of it. So we've got a mixture of multicolored sprites and then high resolution black borders, which really do make the Lemmings stand out from the background, which is why I guess it was done like that. But we can see there's a whole bunch of dynamic sprite data being copied into the visible sprites. This bank here are the visible sprites because that's where the bitmap is. And then all of these sprite frames are being copied and maybe partially decompressed from the memory higher up at 4000 and at 8010 hex as well. So there's actually quite a ton of sprite animation frames, which is what you would expect, right? But a lovely intro, translated really well from, I think, the Amiga version. It's ages since I played the Amiga version, but I'm pretty sure the Amiga version had a very similar intro. So into the game title screen. Ah yes, the infamous code entry screen. Now, I don't have the manual, obviously, but I do know where you can download a text version of the manual. So let's go there and see if we can find it. This looks like a lemming on a bicycle, right? Yeah, I'm just checking to make sure that this disk version actually hasn't had the protection removed, and it hasn't. It's telling me to try again, because I was pretty sure that that would not be correct. There were disk versions out there that looked completely original, but they had the protection code just slightly patched out. The debugging details text file that I'm writing for this particular video release, I will link the manual for Lemmings into there as well for my reference, but also for your reference as well if you want to find the manual. So this kind of like manual check can be quite easily defeated by just copying the book, the manual, or if you have time, just writing down a textual description of the thing that you see, and then like this, writing down all of the codes, and as long as you get most of them correct, then it shouldn't really matter. Sometimes I remember, busily copying down by hand code wheels and cutting out the code wheel windows and all of that kind of stuff. But I guess coming on 3 discs, they really wanted to protect their investment for this release of the game. I wonder how well it's sold. Lemming on a bicycle. The 9th number. 25755. Keep your fingers crossed. Yay! So we have this nice little intro screen. It's nice and functional, nice and colourful. It's got a nice little scroller down at the bottom. So here we are, it's asking for disk 2, side A. It then goes off and hopefully loads a great big chunk of data. Quite a lot of data at the end of memory there. You can see being read in and then decompressed. And then even more data. Tons of data, there we go. Okay, we've got this little intermission screen which tells us what to do. And then here we go. Now this horizontal screen resolution is reduced, and it's reduced for a really good reason. But it doesn't look too bad, right? The frame rate is actually pretty good. Let's see if we can deduce where the graphics are. Well, okay, this is a dead giveaway, I think. So we can see sprites, but those sprite blocks in the bottom half of the bank there that we can see in the graphics map, they actually look like the background blocks, right? So it looks like, and there's the level graphics, which also translate pretty well into sprite data, right? So the background graphics, this is the uncompressed background graphics for the whole level, but this is the active visible graphics in the second bank here. And when we scroll around, it's only updating some of the sprites. So that means that the background for the game is actually comprised of sprites. And the way that it's only updating some of the sprite data kind of indicates to me that the sprites are being moved left or right, and then a new column of sprites is introduced to the left or right hand side of this window that we can see in the middle of the screen, and depending on your scroll direction. And then only those new sprites that are introduced as a new column on the left or on the right then get updated with data. And we can see that the data is progressively built up in vertical strips. Don't forget that there are three characters worth of data, because each sprite is 24 pixels wide or 12 multicolored pixels wide. But what about the lemmings? Well, if the sprite data is making up the background, and the background is, brown, orange, and green for this, it looks like it anyway, right? Brown, orange, and green. The lemmings are using a whole bunch of different colours. Now, the lemming graphics would have to be, we can see here, look at that, there's the two character screens which are double buffered. And the lemming graphics are using, oh yeah, I completed the level. but the lemming graphics are using two double buffered character screens with what looks like from the graphics memory at least two character sets. Looking through the data in memory as bitmap data, we can maybe see what looks like, oh yeah, those look like partially compressed sprite frames for lots and lots of lemmings, right? But this is the live bank, the visible bank of graphics. So we can see, as more and more lemmings come on the screen, we can see that actually there's more and more dynamic characters being updated in those two character sets there at 50,000 and 58,000 in hex. And each character set, one character set is for the left hand character screen and one character set is for the right hand character screen. And look at that, the crosshair, which is white there, is actually using characters as well, so dynamic characters for the crosshair. Interesting. So this is the twist. This is the little surprise. The background is sprites, and then what were sprites, or what should be sprites in terms of the lemmings, are actually characters. So it's opposite to what you would think. So the background is sprites, and the lemmings are characters. In other words, the lemmings are the background. If you want to assume that the characters are background, which you would normally do that, right? So we can see in that other bank there, starting at 8,000, which is the third bank, if you like, that contains the uncompressed sprite data for the whole level. And okay, so I've saved all of the lemmings on that level. So we can see a character set there being introduced, which is a reverse character set. So the color bar effect is actually the screen color being changed, I think, by the looks of that. And then the foreground is black. So you see the transparent screen being updated as a raster bar, or great big raster bar there. So on this level, we can use some blockers. And we can actually get quite a lot of animated lemmings on the screen all at the same time. So if we put some blockers here, each level has different music, which I like. I think anyway. It sounds like all the music is different. But look how many lemmings you can have on the screen. If you're not tied to updating at 50 frames a second, which obviously not, then we can actually have a ton of lemmings. So when the sprites scroll around to have the scrolling background effect, the the characters are also, the lemmings as characters are being moved around too, and just refresh. We can see how much of each character set is actually used in terms of characters. So we can see that the characters, the higher up the characters go, the wrong character set looks different, right? But if we look at the character set data in the graphics map, we can see that the random data is just data that's left over. But we can see as the game has got really quite busy, it's maybe used up half or maybe even 2/3 of all of the characters. So it doesn't look like it ever kind of like runs out. It looks like 256 characters are enough. So the plotting methodology looks like it basically looks for an allocated character. If it's not there, then it allocates a new one and then draws the relevant masked data to that character. It's kind of similar somewhat to the dynamic bullets in some games, for example, that use dynamic characters for bullets, where if a bullet would have shared the same or partially the same character cell, then it reuses that data. But we can see as I scroll the game left and right, then the dynamic character routine is using the same characters for the lemmings, so it seems to have some kind of like caching in there or something like that, perhaps, which avoids having to recalculate all of the characters all of the time, which obviously makes sense, right? Because you don't want to have to calculate all of the characters all of the time. You want to try and reuse as much data as possible. Yeah, it's probably got some kind of like caching algorithm in there or something like that to reduce the CPU load. That's interesting. When the lemmings exploded, the background level data, the original level data, which is held outside of the main visible VIC bank, actually updated, as well as the sprites being used for the background that were in the visible portion as well. They are also updated, of course. So I wonder if we can see exactly the extent of the sprites that's being used for the scrollable area. I have a feeling it's probably all 8 sprites. But there's going to be at least one sprite masked out, right? This is interesting. The animating green bubble effect down at the bottom, look, it's actually characters. We can see those characters being drawn in the 2 double buffered screens there. So actually what looks like background is not really background as sprites, it's actually background as characters that's sharing the same kind of dynamic characters as the lemming sprites, which are not sprites, they're characters. So I have a crazy idea. Let's copy over, transfer some data from the start of memory into the visible sprite area. So that's 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, we'll do that, and then we'll see, there we go. So I've corrupted the visible sprites, but we can see that the lemmings quite happily walk around. So obviously the lemmings are using the off-screen representation of the level for their collision detection. They're not using the visible sprites at all, which is very sensible. So if I transfer the memory again, we can see that we can see the sprite window. We can see how the sprite data, so the sprite data is not being copied, the sprites are actually moving when it moves left and right. So the data is not being copied at all, only new data is being introduced to the left and to the right. And we can see that obviously because the game wouldn't be copying, and we don't see the game copying all of the huge amount of memory for all of the sprites all of the time. It makes sense that the game would be moving the sprites most of the time to get some free scrolling going on. Of course, the scrolling is actually really quite complex because it's having to update all of the character-based lemmings. We can see the white border around the 2 character screens. that white border is going to be black pixels around the edge, and it's not transparent. The black color is actually transparent inside the debug view there. So what that means is that the sprites are behind the character screen. The character screen is in front of the sprites in terms of priority. Because we filled the sprites with rubbish data, we can see actually down at the bottom as it scrolls along, we can see that column of sprites going over the characters for the status panel, right? Just adding some notes about what we have seen so far. And if I fill the data for the character sets and the sprites with 0, so I clear it all, you can see exactly what is being updated without any scrolling going on. So some of the sprite data for the animating torches, for example, in the background are being copied over. There, you can see it right there. And also just the characters. There we go. And as I scroll, it introduces more data to the left and to the right hand side for the sprites. So filling the sprite data with a solid color allows us to see exactly what is being updated. So actually, with the screen not scrolling, most of the sprite data is left untouched on a frame by frame basis, apart from animating torches and probably the flames shooting out of the side of some of the parts of the levels that we see in later levels. And if you look at the character sets, now I've cleared out with 0 pixels all of the character sets, you can see that all of that, what was random data there before, is not really updated. It's not needed because the two dynamic character sets are used wholly for the crosshair and the lemmings. We can see actually so the footprints are high resolution sprites. We could see the mushroom cloud explosion is actually using a high resolution overlay and then multicolor sprites as well. So they're quite cleverly using a few extra sprites to give nice graphical variation for the panel, for the status panel. So let's get rid of those A characters around, which are the solid black characters, for the border around the two double buffered screens just by filling the screen with 0, which looks like it's the transparent character in the character set. So if we get rid of all of the border and also fill all of the sprites with solid color, then we'll see the full extent of the sprites being used for the game, because there's no black border of characters over the top of the sprites anymore. And there we go, back into the game we can see the full extent of the sprites. There, I've actually cleared out most of the data, for the panel down at the bottom of the status panel, so it looks pretty black, empty. But you can see there the sprites as they move around, especially when all of the sprites are filled. You can see how the sprites move off the left and to the right, and then are introduced onto the opposite side depending on the direction of scroll. There we are. So without that black character border, it's pretty obvious what's going on there. So let's see if we can notice any stores into the character set. Luckily enough, it looks like the lemmings start getting introduced into the second character, at least at the beginning of the character set. So we can just put a ranged watch point for the first few characters in the character set there. There we go. We've got the code which updates it, and okay, so this is not really a surprise. It's copying from data up towards the end of memory, and it's then doing an or and then store. So it's probably updating the graphics like that. So it's doing a few passes of data and calculation before storing the final data into, say, for example, 5010, 5018. So there's some frames there. It looks like the data has been optimized. So the data is probably, organized in such a way that it's 256 pixels wide, by the looks of that, or that many bytes wide. Anyway, so just about the graphics map debug view is luckily the same width as the width of the graphics data that's held in that upper part of memory, so it looks like sensible characters, but it's just lucky that it is. But it looks like if we let's see if we can zoom in. So if we zoom into that data, there we go, we can see that actually there's probably like 1.5 at least lemmings, maybe even 2 and a bit. Yeah, just slightly less than 2 lemmings. So each lemming is not very high, or maybe it's just compressed in such a way that it's not very high in the original data, perhaps. Anyway, so the data looks like character set data, but it's not full characters. So there's obviously some logic in there to copy different ranges of different original data. Perhaps that's for a head pointing one way and the body pointing the other way, for example, or vice versa, or whatever, or animated arms or whatever. So maybe the data is nicely compressed in that format. This just seems to be all optimized for the fastest copying with the least amount of code, or a reasonable amount of code to get a reasonable speed of this character-based Lemmings draw, which is kind of what you would expect. And there we go. I put a range breakpoint higher up, and it actually starts, when I told the Lemmings to start digging, it started copying from that new ranged breakpoint from the original semi-compressed graphics data there. So yeah, there's a lot of frames for the Lemmings, as you would kind of expect. So it's going to be copying all of that data. It's kind of really quite amazing, really, that it's been squeezed into the Commodore 64's memory as much as it has, really. I'm really quite impressed. When I had this game, I was really quite pleased that this was a swan song, if you like, the last hurrah, or almost the last hurrah for a good long period of time, actually, on the Commodore 64. But of course, in the last 10 years or so, new games have been released for the Commodore 64, because there's a whole bunch of people like me who are now old who want to get new games for their old retro computer, and which is why I do these kind of videos, because I still enjoy talking about this lovely old machine and the technical details in games. So if you like this kind of video, then please do consider liking or subscribing to this channel, and there are buttons down below specifically for that. And if you do that, it would be wicked, sweet, awesome. Thank you very much. Also, add some comments if you have some feedback, or if you'd like to request a game for me to have a look at, and I'll be happy to add them to the list. So have a great day or evening or night wherever you are, and take care.